Thank you. So, just maybe a little bit of background of what we're going to talk about today. The topic at hand is Ericka Beckman's work.
So if you came for accents, you can go, huh? You have the-
And we have Lionel Bovier here from Édition Ringier with us. And for the last about 16, 17 years, Lionel and I have collaborated on a vast number of projects, shows, books, publication on a small group of artists that have started working in the United States in the late 70s. And it's an ongoing collaboration that is both curatorial and scholarly, and now that also has ventured into bookmaking. And for quite a long time, we were talking about films and how there were a number of filmmakers from that generation that were of great interest to us, especially Dara Birnbaum and Ericka Beckman. And at some point, things kind of clicked, and we decided to sort of contact her and actually do something. And this something is ongoing. It started with the remasterization and the publication of her first great mature work, which is called the Super 8 Trilogy, and which Ericka started in 1978 and ended in 1980. We now have a second phase of this collaboration, which is a large, comprehensive retrospective of her work that opened 2 weeks ago in Bern, at Kunsthalle Bern. And we are now in the third phase of our work with Ericka, where we have started working on a large reference monograph. One of the things that was so exciting for us is that we found in Ericka's work things we had seen before. We had a few films here and there. I first saw Ericka's work in 1989, an Anne Goldstein show, A Forest of Sign, in Los Angeles. One of the things that we found so exciting is that it touched upon a lot of questions that interested us greatly about a certain group of artists that started working in the late 70s in America, and that we're all involved. I'm going to really simplify because I'm talking here about a large number of people, but who were all involved in one way or another in a way that we form symbolic orders in our head, but who did it not necessarily through older means, meaning through psychoanalysis or but who were looking at culture and who were looking at how the culture that's all around us and the culture that we kind of breathe is an integral part of how we construct an image of the world, and therefore an image of who we are, and how all of that structures also all of our interactions. And when we went deeper with Ericka's work and when we really delved into it and discovered a lot of works that we hadn't seen and that in fact had not been shown for a long, long time, we discovered that there was those kinds of concern that interested us, but there was also so much more, and it was a kind of a discovery of an incredible continent. And one of the things that is I think so idiosyncratic to Ericka's work and so interesting and such a key element for us is that all of those ways that we build an image of the world were actually never considered in terms of just images or media, but as things that exist in a three-dimensional space and things that exist in a physical space, and that the way that we move and the way that we interact and the way that we construct our own identity through that physical space counts as much, so to speak, as culture. So that's it for the little introduction.
Very nice.
And I think that there's a number of works that exist prior to that, but the show begins with this trilogy that was remastered, and in a way it is the first mature work of yours, so to speak.
Right.
Before that, there's a lot of interesting things, but this is really the first work where you begin to do the work for which you've become known, and in a way which continues until today. And I was hoping we could start with that.
Okay. We certainly can. I have some images from that work. Okay. The trilogy films were made in Super 8, and they were made in my studio. I was interested at the time in finding a way to create images actually to create performances that are specific to film, meaning performances that interacted with models and sets that I built and animated. So performances that could only exist in film do not exist in real space and time. Also in this work, I was interested in exploring the work of Piaget. I was friendly with Matt Mulliken at the time. Matt was doing his cosmology, and while he was doing that, I was reading Piaget. I was trying to formulate a kind of idea. I wanted to understand pre-linguistic thinking and how a child begins to formulate his position in the world. Starting with the world being centered on the self, and eventually becoming the reality that we all live in today as adults. Specifically, I was interested in when a child begins to differentiate between an action that is reversible and an action that is reversible or non-reversible. When that happens, when they can see that, their memory is formed. A memory is formed. Some circuits are created that are lasting forever. And this formation of memory I was really interested in. So I followed Piaget very loosely, and I made 3 films. This is called We Imitate, We Break Up. And I was pretty much devoted myself to trying to understand this particular phase where a child imitates reality and it begins to differentiate themselves from it and learns about reversible motion. The second one is You the Better. It's called The Broken Rule. It features Mike Kelly. At this time in my life, I was bi-coastal, so I was moving between LA and New York. And actually, as a young moving image maker, it was really valuable for me not to be in New York, but to be in Los Angeles, where I felt the work was more conceptual and it had humor to it that I didn't find in New York. So I was thankful that I spent really formative years in LA. Mike Kelly, this is a film that's about rule formation, the difference between a personal rule and a social rule. It ends with a song, which is also part of my work. If everybody does it, will it be a real rule or not? At the same time of making images, I worked collaboratively with a composer, and he basically was slave to me, and I was trying to do these rhythmic structures with my voice that were based on percussive beats and little phrases and things. He helped me out a lot, and through doing that, we established a collaboration that would last until the mid-'80s. So this is Paul Mcmahon, Out of Hand, third film in the series. Out of Hand is really about memory. Basically there's a setup in the film about a young guy who has to leave his home, and he's traumatized by it and has to go back to the house to locate a toy that would represent his passage. And he finds out that he's beyond a child at this point, and he has to find something symbolic to represent this passage in time. So Paul Mcmahon, these are just film stills. Okay, what we have here is a storyboard. I thought at this juncture it might be nice to talk about drawing a little bit, because my work involves many, many stages of work. Conceptual stages, research, a lot of loose drawings. And eventually something is formulated that looks like a storyboard, and this is the only thing that I have from this particular period that isn't in a notebook form, but I thought I would show it to you as, even though you don't know the films, and if you get the Lionel's trilogy, you'll see them, but a lot of what you see here is not in the movie. So honestly, things are really worked out in drawing way ahead of time before they even make it to the scripting stage. The next film that I made in the series, after moving from Super 8 to 16 millimeter, I started to work with, because the Super 8 gauge is about the size of your little fingernail, and now I was working with something about the size of your thumb. It meant 4 times the scale. So my films then had to be scaled up, production-wise, as well as everything in them had to be scaled. So I had to think about real space. Prior to this, the black space was my ground, and everything cut within it so that there was a continuous sense of motion, of things appearing and disappearing as in a thought process. Moving to 16 meant I had to go into the real world. So I started to design game boards for my films. I seized at this moment on the idea of making films that feature game as opposed to narrative. I wasn't interested in narrative at all. And the games seem to have a lot of attributes that narrative have, such as identification, goal-oriented tasks, conflict and outcome. So I said, perfect, and rules.
And that's, that's exactly that, because games are a cultural phenomena, but at the same time it involves
yes.
a conquest of a physical space,
right.
Always.
And cooperation with each other and competition and all those psychological things that go with it. So these are like examples of really rough charcoal drawings that start a process of thinking about how to create a game space.
But it's a game, it's closer like to organized sports, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. What,
it's like sports, meaning like there's teams, there's...
Yeah, because I wanted to now work with games, I've decided that I would actually physically create a game, create a space for a game, and then some things are just worked out. I don't even know. I just thought I would show you these drawings.
That was one of the
we'll stop for a second.
That was one of the great moments of coming into Ericka's studio and discovering that there were enough drawings to fill in a whole museum, and they looked really awesome.
I brought a couple of film clips. I thought I would show them next. One is a little clip from the introduction of You the Better. You the Better was my first game film. I made three pretty elaborate 16 millimeter half-hour films between 86 and 99, all dealing with game. And I brought a clip here of You the Better, which is the intro, the song that was created to set up the themes in the film and that are then elaborated by the film itself.
And maybe before we start, could you say a few words about, because those films have a very particular look that's, I think, very much yours, and there's a number of influence that can be seen. One is almost like primitive magic cinema, like Méliès, and then there are things that relate to surrealism, but maybe in a very distant way. It's hard for me to gauge how much you were looking at those avant-garde films from the 20s, or how much you weren't. And then there are things that have to do with more commercial culture, and you have like the glory days of the American musicals of the 40s.
Right, there are a lot of influences there. So.
Was this something that you were consciously thinking of, or this is just all of those things were in your mind, and that's how it came to be?
You ask an artist a question like that and you get an artist answer, which is like who your friends were and what you were looking at. So when I was at Cal Arts, I was looking at a surreal film, and that was my education. Luckily, I have to say this to this audience, that I'm very happy that I didn't live in New York to be inundated with the American avant-garde, because as a woman filmmaker, I probably would have hit the back door. But in California, my influences were the performance people who were showing in LA at the time. Gita Conte, whose studio I visited, whose performances I saw, who really allowed me to think about film as a medium for performance. Also his use of construction and props. Also, these are like permissions that artists get. Jack Goldstein was visiting California when I was visiting to go to school there. So he was making his first loops during that time, and he showed me his work as well as the work of Pat O'Neill, an animator from Southern California. And Goldstein's loops were shot against a black backdrop, and both of these artists selected images from their daily life and made the image iconographic so that it could be inscribed with new meaning. And basically, I was interested in artists who were training you, the viewer, how to see their work by making the work. And Goldstein was one in California. Gita Conte.
Started with performance as well.
Pardon?
I mean, his early pieces were also performative. So
That's
you
right.
share also that with Mike Kelly.
Definitely. Mike Kelly, as I was saying, I was going back and forth. So Mike Kelly and I became friends first. I saw his performance work and thought he was a great performer and asked him to be in my film. I keep getting it confused with this one, The Broken Rule. And he and I early on shared a correspondence between New York and LA. He didn't come to New York that often, hoping that we would collaborate on a piece. And he kept rejecting my versions of his scenarios, and they kept on turning up in performance work. But eventually he called me when he was ready to collaborate, and we did a tape called Blind Country together. Moving to New York, my influences were Michael Smith, Julia Hayward, Laurie Anderson, Wilson, Foreman, Mabu Mines, and anybody who was working in experimental theater performance at the time. So that's stuff.
Okay, shall we see a clip?
Yeah, let's watch a clip of You the Better. This is, again, the introduction to the film.
If things could change, it could only change for the better, the better. It could only change for the better. You, the better, 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 the better.
Uh-oh, it's playing.
I'm big and strong as a building can be. I look past the community and what do I see? I see land out there stretching far and wide. I think I'll blow up and subdivide. Subdivide, subdivide. Spread yourself far and wide. Roll and tumble all around before you stop and settle down. Subdivide, 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 subdivide. Look through these gates and you will see subdivision to the last degree. For there to be continuity, you've got to see more than one of me. Build a house on this empty lot. Build a home that's new. And see the community come out to you. Subdivision knows no end. You break down into a unit and you do it again. You break down into a unit and you you do it again. You break down into a unit and you do it again. You break down into a unit and you do it again. You break down into a unit and you do it again. You break down into a unit and you do it again. But what do you have left when there is nothing? Nothing left. Nothing left at all. Ba-doo bow 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 points. 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 Points in the distance. Points on the land. Points make it possible to expand. Uniting the lines of our plan. Points awaiting our demand. Ba-doo bow 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 points. Ba-doo bow 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 points. Ba-doo bow 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 points. So go out there and get those points. It's up to you to get those points. But everybody wants to get those points. But we play games to get those points. A game that's won is played for points. A game that's good makes lots of points. But go out there and score some points. So go out there and score some points. Ba-doo bow 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 points. Ba-doo bow 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 points. Ba-doo bow 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 points.
You the Better is it's kind of it was made as an interactive game, although at the time when I made it in 1983, there's no technology for it. So what I decided, how I made it into my idea of the interactive game at that particular time was to involve the audience as the better. And the game featured a number of players in a physical game world that played a game with rules that constantly changed. And the instruction was that these players were supposed to learn the rules in the game and then also perform at a heightened ability after they learned the rules so that they could win for the better or their investor. So there was, so this song is like a sort of a premise, and the film tries to prove the premise that if you leave the world of physical expansion and you move into this world of abstraction or monetary abstraction in this case, that the myth of expansion and success is just furthered, and the game continues ad infinitum until something happens to make it stop. I have another cue which I'm going to actually I'm going to play this cue and talk over it a little bit, and then I'll stop it kind of if I feel like it's just going on too much, but it'll be silent for here. So in the middle, the film is like I said, a series of games that change on the players. And here we have Ashley Bickerton, as a young artist, who has moved in a roulette wheel game to the center from the periphery. His teammates are on the periphery out there. And he takes his position up so that he can analyze the mechanics of the game and to figure out the speed and the distance of these flying targets. Once he figures this out, he actually controls the game and he's winning a lot. But he decides for a second to try something else, just to, like a normal guy would, to just try doing a fancy throw, and he discovers the house that's hidden in the back of the game, in the back of the set. So Ashley in this scene, is trying to warn his players that there's no point in playing this game anymore because there is a house in the back that is going to empty the money from the game, and that the myth of being excellent at what you do is just a myth, and there's really no reason to believe in it. And so they are getting angry at him, here because they can't hear him. There's such spatial distance that they're getting his words all mixed up, and he's trying to warn them. And so as this scene continues, it's actually in the center of the film and forms where the film switches over into another game, which is linear and progressive, where the game board now looks like the houses that were laid out in the subdivision at the beginning of the film with that song.
One
Yeah.
other thing that I want to talk about, maybe you can say a few words. There's a lot of, even in the older film, everything has a look of not just artificiality, but kind of also of a new type of artificiality that was just beginning to be seen at the time. That was computer-generated imagery. But at the same time, all your films are really, really handmade. You use stop-motion animation, you use sets, you use props. I mean, you know, I've seen your film, and there's a more recent film called Switch Center, and there's a tower, and the tower turns, and it looked a bit fake, but it was still, you know, it looks like a big tower. And I arrive in your studio, and I see a little cardboard model that's this big. So everything is still done, you know, in a very kind of
You also
in
build
a kind
the
of
props yourself.
Yeah, and you build the props yourself,
Without-
and you write the songs. There's a kind of handmade, hyper handmade quality to what you do, and at the same time, it has a kind of sensibility that some of it looks like. You know, I remember some of the films that I saw of yours in the late '80s, and I was like, "Wow, this is like Tron." You know, it has a kind of those old, but basically technology-mediated imagery, but it's really not the case, in fact.
I think that there's a reason I work with my hands, and that's because I like the thinking that goes on with that process, and so it allows me to, as we now say, slow down a bit, so that I am now concentrating at a point where I can arrive at associations that I want to make in the work. And I can't do that if I am like hyper thinking, you know, like I'm one step ahead and trying to go backwards. I have to be really in the moment when I'm making this stuff. So even today, the work is made in response to a physical environment. And so that part of my work is pretty much the root of it all, that it has to be a physical activity that I perform or somebody else performs, or I perform with the camera, or I mean, it's just, that's the way it is. So, but again, the idea of making everything is intrinsic to what I do, and I don't think that, would ever change, Well, let's move on. Okay. So this clip is about over, and these guys are now in a basketball game, of which, because they've eliminated Ashley because he's non-competitive, and they're on to a new game with a new set of rules. Like I said, the film is progressive. It moves through a series of courts which take on the characteristics of the subdivision at the very beginning of the film. So the film kind of wraps around and proves itself here. However, just in all gambling games, there's an element of chance. It's the only time that the bettor can actually win is when the one-armed bandit in the slot machine shows up and empties the coins from the game. And so in my film, there is, in this particular section, there's a bandit who appears, and because these players are constantly adapting to new rules, they misinterpret what's going on, and they hand the ball over to the animated bandit, and the house gets pissed off, and that's the end of the film.
Maybe we can talk very briefly about Cinderella, and also because of the time, we can talk to the way that your present work also talk a bit about.
Yeah. So I brought a series of images that are from Cinderella. Fabrice had this idea today that it would be good just to show drawings and to talk about drawing as part of the process. So I put together this package here of early charcoal drawings for the film Cinderella, which came next. It was the second game film, and it started by reading countless Cinderella stories from different cultures, different times, and condensing them in a game-like way so that you could follow the protagonist through time, through different motifs of the same Cinderella story. I was interested in the idea of production at the time, industrial versus where we are now. So the film starts in a forge, hence, oopsie, I went backwards, that wasn't right, okay. Features some of the motifs that we all know, the clock that strikes the hour. But my Cinderella film is a girl propelled back and forth trying to achieve the, quote, Cinderella destiny, attitude, plan. And she finds in the process of doing this that she can say no to it and claim her voice. So it's actually it's actually kind of a feminist reworking of Cinderella, but in a very, very playful way, flipping through industrial settings, manufacturing settings, and that shows you a film still from the movie where her dress becomes the actual continuity in the film, where she starts off with no dress at all, and eventually, by not being able to play the Cinderella game, she accumulates a knot dress. So that's a play on the word N-O-T and knot. Knot then transforms into a web, then turns into a dress that encloses her. Then she finds the space between the knot where she can be free, and she escapes. And so there's a process in that film.
There's a density.
There's a density. Yeah. Which brings us to Switch Center.
So this is a film from 2001, is that correct too?
Started in 2001, was finished in 2002. I took, at this point in my life, I stepped out of the black studio and the black box and making props and doing everything in the dark, and moved into a location. Sort of the backbone of my work, I'm always interested in places of play and work, so gardens, amusement parks, stadiums, industrial sites. And I was fortunate to be invited to shoot a film in a water purification plant on the outskirts, on the Danube River on the outskirts of Budapest. And I was there shooting, this begins the second phase of this phase of the work that I'm involved in now, where I'm actually animating with my camera in architectural locations and creating a film with ideas and in response to the architectural locations. This particular place was being transitioned to a shopping mall after I shot there. And this still is from it. It's a shoot that I did the day after a Pokemon commercial was shot in this location. But most of the film is, you can see it on my website if you're interested in seeing, but most of it is the reanimating of a very dead space, bringing it back to life, at the same time saying goodbye to industrial time. And there's at the end of the film, there's a conflict happening that I'd rather not describe, but the film is short enough that if you're interested, you could see it.
Come see it in 3D, in real life.
Yeah.
Come to Bern.
Yeah. So the latest work is a film that I shot at the Harvard Stadium in Boston. And if you look at this still, you'll see that there's no advertising and that there's a lot of steps. And I basically used my camera lens as a focus point on a piece of architecture in the distance, and I designed a way to make the space move like a machine by traveling around the stadium, going up and down the steps, and keeping my lens focused on one point in the distance, kind of like a surveyor, an engineer would do. But the effect is that the stadium is collapsing, opening and collapsing like a cup or an accordion. Once I discovered I could do this, I then tried to make a film where the stadium itself is responding to a game that's being played in the field, a football game. I built a model that moved up and down and I shot cheerleaders. This film is also on my website, so if you're interested, it's a short 7-minute film that can be seen.
I think one feels the density also in the way you show us this, that there's the film performs something that is scripted. The script is an allegorical condensation of readings that are themselves symbolic of how the world is functioning. That, I didn't realize that until I came to the show as well, that you were able to translate that in a way in the space. Like, we had the feeling I was coming into one of your games at the end. Like, as a viewer, I was kind of, and I think
that's how we designed it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's quite interesting that you're able to approach that from the drawing, as you said. The process of planning and scripting to the actual performance. I think when hear you sing and performing the music or asking performers to do some actions, up to the physical installation of the works, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I'm interested in closure.
Mm-hmm.
So for me,
process. It's not only
process and closure. So each work I feel has to close its idea down, and so that for me is really important. So the show was not just to install the pieces in a museum setting, but rather was to create a flow through it using color and lighting to take you through a process of and kind of mood changes. Mm-hmm. So you feel like you're a different viewer for each piece, like your mindset has to, that was the goal. Mm-hmm. So in this film, we used a parabolic speaker, made a bench, made it feel like sort of a kind of a casual sports bar kind of thing. And of course it's a complicated matter, and it's like with all media show, it's now there is in Basel there is Michel Oder and there is Steve McQueen, and there are different kind of shows, and that you have to take the time to actually see the films. And here we have about 7 films of Ericka that are each spatialized differently, also in relationship to not just a question of mood, but also again creating a physical space that's made of different conceptual elements that are all interacting with each other, almost like different cogs in a machine. And it takes about, if you want to see the whole show, it takes 3 hours, which is a bit daunting to offer that to a public that is used to spend 10 minutes in a show. So, should we take some questions from the audience? Possibly. Good. Well.
Mike promised to ask a question.
Yes. Very good.
Uh-oh.
Well done.
That's his intro. That's the question.
That's his intro.
Listen to it. You're going to have 2 answers to this.
Great, Mike.
The answer is yes.
How did you come up with that question, Mike?
Good timing. Did you... you said that the tone was different in LA from New York.
Yeah.
what years are we talking?
We're talking about 75 through, well, actually, let me just get this straight. I returned in 76, and I was there back and forth until 1980.
Uh-huh.
So that's what the period I'm talking
Because
about.
I would assume your community was some of the same people
Yeah.
in both plays. So, but I understand. I mean, I felt that too when I was in
Right.
the city at that time. But the communities were so insular. It was always us against them or something. So usually the people that were ensconced or empowered, not empowered, but people that were like visible,
Yeah.
had a more serious tone, whereas the community was a little lighter.
Yeah, you're talking about New York.
Yeah.
I think when I was talking previously about that, I was referring to the American avant-garde structural filmmakers, that if I had just moved to New York out of grad school, and that was my encounter with alternative film, I probably wouldn't have done it. There were a couple of people I liked, like George Landau, now known as Owen Land, and Hollis Frampton. And I had some respect for others. I will say I had respect, but I really didn't like the tone. It was a little bit too heavy for me.
But you were part of that art community, too.
Yeah.
So that your dialogue was within that community.
Yes, but my work was shown cinematically and in festivals, and it was grouped with the avant-garde. And I was kind of uncomfortable with it that way. But I had to keep working, I had to keep showing, had to just go with it.
So did you try to move out of that? You tried to situate yourself within the art world and not do both?
No, I wasn't trying to do both. I was simply, no one understood how to actually show my work at that time in the art world, and it never met its fruition there. And so I picked up every opportunity I could to show.
Well, one of the
Yeah.
things that we did with the show is that there was a real effort to remove your work from a screening room situation.
Right.
And one of the nice things that there are films that we're showing now in Bern that were almost only shown in screening room situation from the beginning, and we went back to the original ideas on how to make them exist in the three-dimensional space that contemporary art exhibition afford.
Yeah.
Good. Well.
Okay, well, thank you. Oh, yep.
Did I hear you say in Bern, did I hear you say in Bern that you were continuing this work? It's
Yeah.
an unfinished piece, technically? Or
Yeah, it's,
could you
well,
elaborate on that?
Yeah. I finished it for a screening in the fall, but I'm shooting, there's another segment of it that I'm shooting this summer, and it's in Italy, in a stadium designed by Luigi Nervi, who's a Mussolini-era poured concrete guy. And it's a stadium that's still intact and, again, has no advertising. And, again, I'm using my camera myself with this, in the same process that I did at the Harvard Stadium. But I'm moving it into a darker zone because of where I'm going with it. So that will be finished, yeah, very soon.
Good. Well, thank you, Lionel. Thank you, Ericka.
Thank you, Fabrice.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you,